The world map has changed significantly over the past 100 years. World wars, decolonization, and the breakup of the Soviet Union all caused borderlines to be drawn and redrawn, new countries to form, and others to disappear completely. In recent years, however, the world map has been more constant and the new formation of countries has slowed. Only 6 states have joined the United Nations since 2000, and just 4 were newly independent ones. Due to many factors, including the decline of wars of conquest since World War II and secession movements frowned upon by national governments, states haven't been getting bigger or smaller. Understanding how many states there are and why borders have been fixed is important because of the implications for self-government, future conflicts, and the way we organize our societies. If you looked up how many states there are in the world, you would get different answers depending on the criteria used. The United Nations has 193 member states, but if you include the 2 observer states, Palestine and the Vatican, there are 195 states. That number jumps to 201 if places that are recognized as states by at least one UN member state are included. Settling on the definition of a state is complicated and interpreted in different ways. Sovereignty, or complete authority over a geographical area, is considered a prerequisite to becoming a state and a member of the United Nations. A country has a defined geographical area, but may or may not be sovereign. England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are all technically countries, but the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is the sovereign state. A state and its government either has de jure legal authority or de facto authority, defined as what exists in reality. As of October 2022, the Afghan Taliban government is not recognized as a de jure authority by any UN member state, but it is the de facto government of Afghanistan. In 1933, the Montevideo Convention set 4 criteria that must be met in order for a political unit to be considered a state. The convention says a state must have a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the ability to enter into diplomatic relations with other states. This is known as the declarative theory of statehood. Another interpretation is the constitutive theory of statehood, and it says a state is sovereign if at least one other sovereign state says so. Even if a political entity fulfills one or both of the theories of statehood, its status as a sovereign state is still subject to political considerations. For example, Taiwan meets all 4 of the declarative theory criteria and is recognized as a sovereign state by 13 UN members and the Vatican. Even though it meets all of the requirements on paper, the People's Republic of China claims Taiwan as its territory and blocks Taiwan from joining the UN and its agencies, as well as restricting it to competing in the Olympics under the name Chinese Taipei. With Palestine, its status is contentious as a majority of UN members recognize it as a sovereign state, but it is not a full member of the UN. Additionally, it likely does not meet all 4 of the declarative theory criteria, as its territory is not clearly defined, and governance of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is split between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, with Israel having complete or partial security and civil control over most of the West Bank. The predominant organization of states today is the nation-state, in which a government has sovereignty over a group of people with a collective identity. City-states and micronations are much smaller and have similar status with their own sovereignty. Almost all of the world's landmass, excluding Antarctica, is governed by nation-states, but that has not always been the norm. Before the 19th century, most of Earth's land was either unclaimed or ruled by empires or city-states. The development of common national identities, more effective transportation, and the Industrial Revolution all played a role in the formation of nation-states with more centralized governments. Beginning with the Peace at Westphalia in 1648 that ended a religious conflict called the 30 Years' War, and continuing in the 18th and 19th centuries, a new line of thinking proposed that states should not interfere in the domestic affairs of other states a concept commonly referred to as Westphalian sovereignty. Initially a European idea, the concept became more of a standard around the world, culminating with the decolonization of Africa and Southeast Asia in the mid-20th century. As the concept of sovereignty spread around the world, wars of conquest, a major way states grew in size, have increasingly been viewed as illegal. Invading other countries for the purpose of seizing territory now results in sanctions and diplomatic isolation, as Russia has experienced after invading Ukraine. Since World War II, economic liberalization, strong international institutions, and the American and Soviet superpowers helped make wars of conquest less common. If the world trends more multipolar and economic links weaken, however, it may be easier for countries to make land grabs. With wars of conquest mostly off limits for the past 70 years, and virtually all of Earth's land outside of Antarctica now claimed, there haven't been many ways for states to grow in size. Several state mergers have been proposed, but the last time that happened was 1994, when South Africa's 4 autonomous regions united at the end of apartheid. The world map did change significantly in the 20th century as states became smaller and new ones formed through decolonization and the breakup of the Soviet Union. This century, however, the rate of new state formation has slowed, with South Sudan being the world's newest state following its independence from Sudan in 2011. Serbia and Montenegro joined the UN in 2000 and 2006 respectively, after Yugoslavia was broken up, and the two agreed to become separate states in 2006. Timor-Leste became a UN member state in 2002 after achieving independence from Indonesia. There are many other examples of independence movements around the world, but judging by the admission of new UN states in recent years, they have been less successful. Catalonia, Scotland, and Iraqi Kurdistan are 3 of the most well-known and plausible examples. Catalonia, an autonomous region of Spain, conducted a disputed independence referendum in 2017 that led to the Catalan parliament unilaterally declaring independence from Spain. The Spanish government responded by briefly placing Catalonia under direct rule, and independence leaders fled abroad. Scotland has held an independence vote before and may hold another soon. In both cases, the nation-states governing these regions, Spain and the United Kingdom, oppose the independence movements. The reasons nation-states often oppose regions gaining independence vary, but often revolve around tax revenues, strategic considerations, and national prestige. Catalonia is a wealthy region of Spain, and the imbalance of taxes the region pays out versus benefits it receives in return is often cited by independence proponents. Independence would mean lost tax revenues for the national government, along with tourism, ports, and important industries and companies. In the case of Scotland, a key consideration for the United Kingdom is the strategic geography Scotland has. It is home to the UK's 4 nuclear missile submarines and occupies the southeast part of the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. The GI-UK gap is a naval choke point that would be critical to control in a major conflict, especially with Russia, as only by transiting the gap or the English Channel can Russia's naval fleet access the open Atlantic. Losing Scotland would be damaging to the UK's economy, defence, and national prestige, so it is not surprising that the nation's 2 largest political parties, the Conservatives and Labour, both oppose Scottish independence. From a nation-state's perspective, losing territory is a losing proposition. Iraqi Kurdistan is a semi-autonomous region in northern Iraq that has its own government and military. With protection from the United States, Iraqi Kurdistan established its autonomy in the early 1990s after Iraq waged a genocide campaign against the region in the 1980s. For decades, the Kurdish people in the region have sought an independent state, and in 2017, 93% of voters in Iraqi Kurdistan voted for independence from Iraq. Faced with the possibility of losing a significant piece of its territory and valuable oil fields, the Iraqi government in Baghdad launched a military offensive and took over 20% of Iraqi Kurdistan, forcing the regional government to end the independence push. Iraq's neighbors, Turkey, Syria, and Iran, also fiercely opposed the Kurdistan independence movement because Kurdish people also live in those countries. An independent Kurdistan breaking away from Iraq could have inspired separatist movements in those countries too. Nation-states may often oppose independence movements, but for years the expectation was that free trade would allow for independence without negative economic consequences. Newly independent states would be unburdened from paying taxes and being subjected to the authority of a larger nation-state while keeping its economy intact. One problem with this thinking is that the newly independent state would likely need approval from the state it seceded from to join a free trade agreement. If Catalonia achieved independence, it would be in the awkward position of needing Spain's consent to join the European Union. Nation-states do not want to lose regions, especially wealthy ones, because they contribute to the nation's economy. Even if a region can become de facto independent, without approval to secede from the sovereign state, it will be difficult for a region to gain international recognition of its independence. Many countries have domestic independence movements, so recognizing one abroad might embolden their own. For example, because of Catalonia, it is not a coincidence that Spain does not recognize the independence of Kosovo, a de facto state that separated from Serbia in 2008. Also, recognizing an independence movement that doesn't have the approval of the sovereign state might damage diplomatic relations. Another barrier to the pinnacle of international recognition, UN member state status, is the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, known as the P5. The Security Council must approve new member states, and each of the permanent members has veto power. 3 states with limited international recognition that are not UN members, Taiwan, Palestine, and Kosovo, each have P5 states opposed to their ascension into the UN. There are about a dozen de facto sovereign states today, but because they don't enjoy broad international support that includes the major powers, their recognition is limited or non-existent. The independence of Timor-Leste and South Sudan, along with the separation of Serbia and Montenegro, all received widespread international backing. In the 21st century, attaining independence is by itself difficult, but what comes next would be even more so, as a new state would suddenly be responsible for all of its affairs. It may have previously had a regional government with police and bureaucracies, but new states would have to create a military, currency, immigration, aviation, maritime, and environmental authorities, build embassies, and enter into foreign relations with the entire world, just to name a few. One of the advantages of a nation-state is that it can use economies of scale when providing services. A larger state has to spend more on public goods like the military and social assistance, but would be able to spread out the costs over a larger tax-paying population. And just because a nation-state has sovereignty over its territory does not mean the national level government has total control. Many nation-states use government models called federalism and devolution, which give significant power and authority to subnational governments like provinces or US states. In federations, certain powers are given to either the national or subnational governments, and others are shared. The allocation of these powers is often set out in a written constitution. In the United States, only the national government can declare war, print money, and sign treaties, while only state governments can conduct elections, issue driver's licenses, and create local governments. Devolved states like the United Kingdom and Indonesia are similar to federations, but the powers of regional governments can be more easily revoked by the national governments. For large multicultural nation-states, federalism allows for a cohesive country while also giving regions the autonomy necessary to set policies that suit their populations. 8 of the top 10 states by population and 7 of the top 10 by land area are federations. As society becomes more complex and the populace has diverging views on policies, a nation-state may have a more difficult time solving problems, providing an opening for localized governance. A federation can offer both the advantages of the nation-state and local solutions. More unique government designs like the European Union and free association also provide a model of governance that allows for coordination of monetary, defense, and foreign policy matters while maintaining sovereignty for the individual members. The European Union operates as a confederation in which the 27 EU states maintain their own sovereignty, but agree to coordinate on trade, monetary, and foreign policy matters. Freely associated states, like the Pacific Island nations of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and Palau, are sovereign states and UN members, but rely on the United States for their military defense and use American government agencies for social services. In a large nation-state, having a common currency and freedom of movement simplifies the flow of people, goods, capital, and ideas. Having multiple currencies and onerous internal border controls is disruptive, and so states opt for nationwide policies in those areas. Policies like policing, education, property, and environmental law can be adjusted region to region with less disruption. Even though China is a top-down unitary state, it created special economic zones that allow select cities to use free market policies to attract jobs and investment. Finding the right balance between the interests of the nation-state and subregions will be crucial to preserving nation-states. If regions decide it is in their best interest to become a separate sovereign state, countries could begin to split. Even though the number of new states has been relatively small this century, of the 4 new UN member states mentioned earlier, all formed from breaking up a larger state. Countries may want to split up for economic reasons, but when a country tries to break apart for ethnic, cultural, or religious grievances, a process called balkanization, splintering may set the stage for more conflict. When 2 or more groups in a country are hostile towards each other, dividing each group into their own sovereign state might be a way to prevent or end a civil war. Timor-Leste became independent from Indonesia after a bloody occupation, and Serbia and Montenegro peacefully separated into 2 sovereign states in 2006 after Montenegro voted for independence. Separation is not always a peaceful process, however. South Sudan began a 6-year civil war, beginning just 2 years after its independence, fought partially along ethnic lines. There are 6 UN member states that were once a part of Yugoslavia, but tension remains high between Serbia and Kosovo, a de facto state with limited international recognition that declared independence from Serbia in 2008. Separating hostile groups into their own nations certainly is not a perfect solution because the division often does not mean a clean break. Disputes over land, natural resources, water rights, and more are not easily solved. British India was divided into majority Hindu India and majority Muslim Pakistan over 70 years ago, but the 2 countries remain bitter enemies and have fought multiple wars over the disputed Kashmir region. One of the uses of the world map is showing the political boundaries for the inhabitable parts of the planet. There are many different government styles, from democratic to authoritarian, left to right wing, but the world's borders show where one-state sovereignty begins and ends. In recent decades, despite various independence movements, borders have been slow to change as the incentive for the dominant nation-state has been to hold on to its territory. If a region wants to chart its own course of self-determination, it must do so facing headwinds from an international system in which the players prioritize their territorial integrity. Subnational units can lobby for more autonomy within their country, but without support from their national government and the major world powers, the road to not just independence, but membership in the international community is a difficult one.